Dr. John Morgan is back on the show again, and in this interview, we're talking all about Puppy Nutrition 101. We go into what you should feed your puppy, how much you should feed your puppy, how often you should feed your puppy, and whether there's anything you shouldn't feed your puppy. John, welcome back to the Dog Show again.
Thanks very much for having me, Will. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we just had a chat about vaccinations, which will come up in another episode, but we're doing all things puppies at the moment, and I've roped you into coming in for a couple of hours so we can have a chat all about that. Today I wanted to talk about puppy diet and nutrition. So you've just got a new dog of your own, Harold.
Yep.
So I'm sure you're thinking about all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But how important is what a dog eats?
Yeah, look, I think it's really vital. You know, like it's more than anything else. You know, it's something we have to think about that goes into our pets daily. More and more, you know, we're becoming aware of nutritional deficiencies of the past, and we're sort of conscious of different food groups that are actually potentially toxic. And I think that, you know, it's worth having, again, the conversation with the vet and doing your own research before making these decisions as a general disclaimer. But yeah, I think it's really important to think about. Yeah,
and I'm sure this is a bit of a leading question, which you may need to give a general answer to again.
Yeah.
But what should what should someone feed their puppy?
Yeah, so I guess in Harold's case, obviously the apple of my eye, he is getting just a high quality puppy food. So for sort of medium breeds, obviously if you've got a large breed dog, then a large breed puppy food is probably appropriate. But really just dry food. My wife can't handle the smell and look of cans. It's fine. And more generally, the food comparison between the same product of a wet and dry food is fairly similar. Okay. A lot of people say we should be feeding both, but I mean, it's largely not necessary. It depends very much on your own personal decision or you know, what your dog likes as well.
Yeah, so I guess you've got the dry food, like the kibble style food. You've got the wet food in the cans, which you spoke about. But now there's also these trends of a raw diet and even like home cooked meals, or there's a few like delivery services as well that, you know, provide kettle cooked meals or whatever it is. I mean, that's a lot to think about for a new dog owner.
But it definitely is. I mean, I guess it depends. Dogs will do exceptionally well, provided they're fed a nutritious food, they're loved, and they're taught what's appropriate and inappropriate in their world, and obviously, you know, given plenty to do. So I think we can often overthink food. Personally, I think that, I mean, raw food generally we need to talk about some of the potential health risks, not only for your pet but also for you, in terms of feeding a raw meat to a dog, which may not cause any symptoms for certain bacteria that they pick up from raw food, but that then can actually be passed on to their human counterparts. Especially when we're living in such close proximity, we do have to think about human health as well as pets' health.
I've always, with raw food, I've always worried about the management of it.
Yeah.
Like, how do you, if I get raw food to feed my dog, like, when do I know when that's not good anymore? If it's cut up and it's kind of in a little bag or something like that.
Yeah.
I imagine there's lots of complexity around that compared to a dry food or something that's canned.
I think fortunately, here at least, you know, most pet foods are fairly well regulated. So a pet food has to have certain quality assurances, you know, a best by date, and generally speaking, it's treated to a point where most diseases are eradicated. Home done raw foods, or sort of just purchased from the butcher raw foods, we have to be a little bit more careful about for those sort of infectious disease reasons. And definitely, you know, we're not cooking the food, so there is a bit of an increased risk of bacteria or diseases within that food to make our pets or dogs unwell. The main thing, I guess, in terms of the raw food being off, certainly, you know, everyone will say, well, dogs have eaten off meat in the wild, and I'm not going to say that that's not true, but I guess, you know, we're looking at a setting where dogs are in extremely close proximity to humans, and we're aware of a lot of the issues. So yes, it's true that historically dogs have eaten raw food, but in this setting we just ask the question, is that appropriate, or do we want to sort of add that risk to the equation?
Okay, well, I think that's probably a discussion where we could get 45 experts in and everyone have a different opinion.
Exactly. Right? And I'm not going to say that my opinion is right. It's just I really like to have the conversation so that everyone's sort of aware of what they're feeding.
And I guess every owner's going to have their own preference. If they've got a strong feeling about that for whatever reason that is, then as long as they do their research on it and go down the right path, then maybe it's okay as well.
100%. Yeah. Look, and I think I'm not going to say that raw foods are bad, but it's always worth just having a chat and again, talk to your vet about some of the risks or some of the benefits of eating raw food. Certainly, I mean, one of the main benefits of a lot of raw foods is dentition. So dry biscuits and wet food commercially don't, unless you're sort of getting a product that's specifically for teeth, they're not chewing as much as they used to. And we're seeing obviously higher rates of dental disease. So certainly commercial foods are great, they're convenient, but the one main thing that we do often see is dental disease starting to spike as a result of that.
Okay. So you mentioned nutrition before. If I'm looking at a packet of dog food, there's so many brands out there and everything. Like, when you say nutrition, what are some of the ingredients I want to see in my dog food?
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of places they can obtain protein from, which is the main component of a dog's diet. And they're not obligate carnivores. They don't just eat meat only. They're sort of technically omnivores, so they're almost close to us in terms of the diet that they should get. So really, I mean, a good quality protein that's clearly labeled, rather than things like chicken meal or pork meal, those kind of things that sort of...
What does that even mean?
Yeah, and that's the question. So you're looking at products that are often byproducts of production for other foods, or sort of they're probably not going to have a whole lot of nutrition to them. But at the same time, we want an affordable pet food, which is where that comes into it. So generally speaking, the higher the price, the better quality the ingredients that are going into it.
Yeah.
To a point, there's a lot of gimmicks and a lot of fads out there that will sort of hike the price as well. So, and also keep in mind your dog's condition. So generally, I try and promote most Labradors and Golden Retrievers to go on to a fairly low-fat diet early on, not only because they're insanely food motivated and very prone to obesity, but also because they have a lot of joint issues, or the potential for a lot of joint issues. So keeping them lean is quite important.
So weight management is obviously a big issue when you're choosing the type of food and the amount you feed your dog, right? Yeah. So how do I figure out how much to feed my dog?
I guess my general rule is to obviously not just look at the packet recommendations. So I find that they do overestimate to sell more food and to cover their backsides.
Okay, interesting.
So look at the dog before you. Obviously, Frankie not being particularly active for your dog, Harold being very active and mildly annoying at times.
Frankie's pretty active actually, and quite annoying, but never mind.
So we look at activity levels. A very low energy Shih Tzu probably doesn't need the packet recommendation. Whereas a Border Collie, you'd want to really talk about ramping up the food quantities based on weight. And again, talking to your vet, having a feel of the belly and body condition more generally can be a good way of assessing that as we go along. But generally, I always say to people, use the packet as a guide, not as a gospel.
Okay. And interesting you mentioned Labradors, Golden Retrievers and stuff. I had a Labrador growing up, and as you said, they'll keep eating. So whereas some dogs, I know that's like Frankie, French Bulldog, she'll actually stop eating sometimes. Or I know there's other breeds, some small breeds they might just not eat because they're a bit grumpy that day or whatever it is. So knowing your breed and knowing their personality is probably important with that as well.
And I mean, another general rule of thumb is your dog doesn't know how much they should eat. So they're adapted for a setting where they've got very limited resources, so they will eat a lot of the time more in a survival fashion.
Okay.
Whereas we're got that sort of off switch where we can say, if I eat too much, I'm going to get gout or be morbidly obese. So, let's just wind that back and tone back on that second hamburger.
I had a dog trainer on the show actually last night. I was interviewing her, and she's also a stand-up comedian. It was a really interesting mix.
Oh wow!
But she she had some weird facts because she'd trained these exotic animals, crocodiles, and all this kind of stuff. And apparently, crocodiles can go for a whole year without eating.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I wouldn't.
I don't think dogs can do that. I wasn't suggesting that.
But it's a really interesting point because there's a lot of studies. This is decades ago because they're slightly unethical, but there's a lot of studies where they showed that dogs can can actually survive quite a long period of time, just given, minerals and water. If they've got a high body condition score, or if they're really fat, they can survive on that for quite a long time.
Right.
So a lot of people sort of want to give them 2 rounded meals because it fits in with our schedule, but just keep in mind that they're not humans, and in a lot of ways, they can survive settings where we might not do as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned 2 meals a day. What is there a perfect amount? I guess it depends, or
Yeah, no, and again, it depends. A lot of people, if they start walking their dogs more, or if they're getting out and about, they need to feed more because they're exercising more, or if they're running wild at the dog park, you see dogs come in, they're almost underweight because they're just so energetic and they haven't changed that amount on the packet. So as always, packet's a guide, but not sort of written in stone. So really, really, really talk to your vet and definitely get a bit of a feel for how much they're eating. And if they're leaving food behind and they are food motivated like beagles or Labradors, you're probably feeding too much.
Okay. But I vaguely remember when Frankie was a puppy that maybe you do more meals when they're younger
That's
and
right.
then kind of spread it out, or?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, so we normally recommend that you feed 3 to 4 meals a day when they're sort of around 8 weeks until 10 weeks. And then you can gradually peel that back to 2, and some people prefer 1 meal a day. I generally recommend just feeding 2 meals a day, just because it's easy to ration what they're getting, and again, we're sort of easy. It's a bit easier to make changes in small amounts to get their weight down if anything changes in the future.
Okay, cool. Is there anything that we spoke about nutrition and what should be in the dog food that you're feeding your dog, but is there anything that you really don't want in there?
Yeah, I guess. For a commercial food, I guess you have these days. It's worth considering the ethics of the food. So, certain proteins or certain products might not be ethically farmed, ethically sourced. So, I guess that's important these days. And a lot of, I guess, dog foods around the world are sort of making that push to look at how they're sourcing their products. You shouldn't really feed dogs exclusively raw meat as well, because there will be a deficiency, especially if you're just going again to a butcher. But always check the packet for raw foods to make sure that they are supplemented with things like taurine, or they're not deficient in other nutrients, or they don't have too much copper in them. Which you'll be able to sort of look at the ingredients and check. But those kind of things, you sort of get a feel for looking at different brands and doing your research on the internet.
And speaking to your vet as well, because I wouldn't know that copper was something I should be looking out for example, or any of that. So
no, exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that we could spend hours on in terms of nutrition. But yeah, your vet's the best source to sort of discuss that. But the main thing is that most commercial foods, because they're regulated in Australia, they'll be generally pretty good. But obesity is the downside to that, because they'll market them and sell them for palatability over sort of maintaining weight or product quality.
You mentioned earlier as well, like meals, kind of watch out for that word as well. That's what I'm thinking. High fats, if you've got a dog that could be overweight.
Yep.
And then you just copper and a few others that you could probably speak to your vet about, and just make sure you're kind of educated on the brand you're buying and what goes into the food
and the breed. I mean, the copper thing in particular. So there is a strong link between a lot of dogs like Schnauzers and terrier breeds like that. They can actually develop a liver disease from too much copper, which used to be over supplemented in dog foods. So it's really important to know your breed of dog, because they are so different, and terriers really require certain foods in certain cases. And as far as other breeds go, German Shepherds and other deep-chested dogs are really susceptible to bloat. So it's worth talking to your vet about their opinion on the foods that are going to minimize bloat, and even feeding techniques to stop bloat as they get a bit older.
Interesting. Yes, we haven't really spoken about it because we're speaking mainly about like what to do when you get a new puppy kind of thing, right? But I know that from our experience with Frankie, she's got allergies and things like that. And we had this long process of figuring out what food she could actually eat. So we had to move away from, the commercial style foods, and we actually cook at home now. That's not what everyone would need to do, obviously, but that's one way to deal with like allergies and things like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that allergies are really closely linked to food. So they do say that a lot of dermatopathies or skin disease are linked to the protein in food. So it's quite a long process, but we often have to do what's called an exclusion diet for dogs that have a bad rash or allergies everywhere. And we actually eliminate all protein from the diet in a way. And then sort of build back up from there. We feed a form of protein that's not going to cause allergies for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then we have to reintroduce foods that may or may not cause an allergic reaction.
Yeah, I remember. Is chicken a common one?
Yeah,
What causes it?
I mean, it's hard to pin because it sort of depends what they're fed from a young age a lot of the time. So the main three that I usually bang on about are chicken, beef, and pork. Just because they're quite common in a lot of pet foods. But it could be anything. So we've ended up with dogs that have had to be fed kangaroo meat.
We use kangaroo.
Yeah, crocodile.
I think I've spoken to a couple of Americans. They mentioned maybe rabbit or elk is kind of equivalent to kangaroo over there that they can use.
Yeah, and that's 100%. So that's what we call a novel protein.
Yeah.
So that has it's a very, very low likelihood of exposure at any point in life, and we use that often as either a test or a long-term food for these guys that really get so itchy on those foods that it becomes quite unbearable, or they need chronic medication.
Cool. Well, that's puppy diet and nutrition. I guess, like, if I was a new puppy owner today, it'd be important to understand this from kind of the initial phase when you first get your dog, right?
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and always, ask your vet. Come in with a list of questions. A lot of vets groan when they see the long list, but it's the most important time to really to flesh out those issues and to really cover the big topics or any questions that you have.
Just book the extended appointment, right?
Yeah. And pick the chattiest vet.
Yeah. Well, John, thanks for sharing those tips on puppy nutrition.
Thanks for having me, Will.
Cheers.